Another landlord ends up homeless due to the eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have another article for you today, and it's about another time that a landlord has ended up homeless because of these eviction moratoriums going on. And as those who've watched my channel for a long time know, several months back I actually covered a different story of a different landlord who also ended up homeless because of the eviction moratorium. Well, it's happened again, and I hate hearing about cases like this, but it is inevitable that some landlords are going to truly suffer the worst consequences because all this has been put into place. So before I get into that article, though, go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you would do if you were put into this landlord situation. Okay? I mean, I wouldn't be very happy about what was going on, and I might do some things that would be questionable in legality, but I certainly wouldn't end up homeless. So, this article, it comes from CBSNews.com, and it says, landlord faces homelessness as tenants fall behind on rent during the eviction ban. Yeah, bad situation. And there's actually some video that comes with this. So I'm going to go ahead and play some of that video for you right now.
Lacasse owns 3 properties in upstate New York, but the single mother and Air Force veteran is functionally homeless after falling on some hard times. Lacasse says after notifying tenants they had to move out so she could move in, they simply stopped paying and stayed put. She and her daughter have been living out of her car and staying with friends. Despite more than $23,000 in unpaid rent, Lacasse can't force her tenants out because of state and federal moratoriums on evictions.
I don't understand how they can give my private property to somebody to live for free.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into the article and see what it says. Brandy Lacasse has been waiting on rent for nearly a year. She owns 3 properties in upstate New York, but the single mother and Air Force veteran is functionally homeless after falling on hard times herself. After notifying tenants they had to move out so she could move in, the tenants stopped paying rent and stayed put, she said. She and her daughter have been living out of her car and staying with friends. I've cried many nights, like thinking, where's my money, she said. Despite more than $23,000 in unpaid rent, Lacasse can't force her tenants out because of state and federal moratoriums on evictions. Not surprising, okay? So the one indicator here that's telling me that this tenant might not be on level and they're playing games is the fact that as soon as she said that she wanted to move into the property, they stopped paying, okay? They were paying just fine up until then, but all of a sudden she wants her property back so that she can move into it, and no, we're not paying you anymore. So that's telling me that this isn't the case of a tenant who is facing financial hardship here. This is the case of a tenant who is playing games and trying to screw over a landlord. But federal money meant to alleviate such situations isn't making it to landlords. Nearly 90% of rental assistance funds allocated by Congress has not been distributed, according to the Treasury Department. I don't understand how they can give my property to somebody to live for free. I bought that property. I fixed it up with my blood, sweat, and tears, she said. The eviction bans were meant to protect vulnerable renters during the pandemic, but some property owners say they've become collateral damage. All property owners that have not been paid rent have become the collateral damage, okay? They put these things in place to protect vulnerable renters, and the problem is, though, that didn't fix the problem, okay? The landlords are the ones who are not being paid here. The eviction moratorium is put into place, and that means that a tenant gets to stay in a property for free. Whether the landlord is paying for the tenant to stay there or the government is paying for the tenant to stay there, the tenant gets to stay for free. The tenant doesn't have to pay anything. They basically are living off of someone else's back, somebody else's hard work, be that the taxpayer or the landlord. So that's the big problem with these eviction moratoriums, because they don't require the tenant to pay anything. The tenant just gets a free ride. A new report shows that nearly 10% of landlords around the country collected less than half of their rent in 2020. Landlords who owned fewer than 6 units were most affected. One thing that's very clear is we have no housing safety net, said the report's co-author, Vincent Reyna, a housing policy expert and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. We're forcing low-income households and owners to essentially bear the cost of that in this current moment, and that's unfair to both parties. What? Unfair to both parties? Okay, think about it for a second. How is the tenant bearing the cost of anything during the eviction moratorium? Okay, they get to stay in a house and not pay rent. Okay, so they're living off of the back of the landlord. Okay, the landlord still has to pay their mortgage payment, their utilities, their insurance, their taxes, their maintenance, etc. Okay, and they have to pay nothing. Now they say, oh yeah, but the debt still accumulates. Well, you know the landlord's going to have an impossible mission trying to get any of that debt paid back to them. So it just is falling 100% on the landlords right now. It's not hurting the tenant other than their credit rating or maybe their ability to rent in the future, but they're not going to pay any of that money back. And that's almost certain in the grand majority of cases. LaCasse's tenant, Carla MacArthur, said she can't pay rent because of child care costs for her daughter and autistic son. I feel bad that I've not been able to pay her, MacArthur said. We've gone from 2 incomes. I had COVID-19 twice. My kids all have had it once. My husband's had it once. We've been affected by the virus. MacArthur was approved for rent relief in New York, but the state hasn't paid LaCasse yet. So far, New York has sent about 8% of its allotment of $2.6 billion in relief directly to landlords. So, we actually have a tenant who actually applied for the rent relief, and once again, bureaucracy and poor, slow government has completely screwed it up. This landlord is getting absolutely nothing, but that doesn't matter, okay? The landlord wanted to move into the property. The landlord doesn't want rental assistance. The landlord needs somewhere to live. Okay, that's why they should have the right to move into their own property if they want to. Okay, that's why we don't like the landlord wasn't asking just you give me this money, but I want to live in my property. I should be able to do what I want with my property, and you're not allowing me to evict this tenant. So this is, the wrong thing. This is the wrong thing, the wrong solution. They're trying to throw money at somebody who wants to live in there. Like, did they even ask the landlords what would work best for them? Of course not. They only thought, oh, well, we're going to help the tenants. And now we have this situation where this landlord is facing homelessness. I invested in these properties, never thinking I wouldn't have a place to live, LaCasse said. I just want my house. That's it. I just want my house. MacArthur fears her family may be homeless after the moratorium ends. I'm not sure what she may do when the moratorium's lifted, she said. That's what I'm afraid of, being homeless. Well, apparently she doesn't give a darn about this landlord, okay? The landlord is homeless, and she doesn't care. The landlord is the one who's not getting paid, and she doesn't care. She gets to live for free in the landlord's house, and she doesn't care. So this is why I believe that all of these eviction moratoriums are 100% unlawful. Okay, 100%. They're unconstitutional. I've said it time and time again. I believe that they violate the Fifth Amendment, okay, where it says that the government can't take private property without giving just compensation. Now, this rental assistance is not just compensation in this case because the landlord actually needs somewhere to live. The landlord wants to take their property back so they can actually live in it. So giving the landlord rental assistance doesn't even help, okay? The landlord is owed $23,000 plus they should be able to get their house back. This tenant, more concerned about herself and not concerned with the fact that she's essentially stealing from a landlord. She's like, oh, I don't want to be homeless. Hey, did she ever ask if the landlord has ever had COVID? I mean, it's not like COVID is one-sided and only affects tenants. Maybe the landlord's had COVID too. The landlord is facing all this financial hardship, and nobody is there backing them up. The state of New York obviously is not a very landlord-friendly place. They're way more tenant-friendly. They're going to continue to extend this eviction moratorium as long as possible. So the other day I reported about how the Supreme Court got rid of a good portion of the law that New York put in place for their state eviction moratorium. And that's a good thing, but their eviction moratorium still exists, and it needs to be completely cut down, in my opinion, because the last thing I want to see is landlords like this small landlord here in New York State who are just continually suffering and can never get out of the cycle of poverty and debt due to having to pay for someone else to live for free.